Bible says in Ezekiel 20 and verse 12, moreover, also, I gave them my Sabbaths to be a sign between me and them, that they might know that I am the Lord that sanctify them. We read of the Sabbath that it is a sign between us and God. Now, we should also understand this, that if it is a sign, then it has two aspects to it. And we want to look at these two aspects, the Sabbath, because it will bring out the real significance of the Sabbath. If the Sabbath is to make meaning to all of us who keep it, then these two aspects of the Sabbath must move together. The problem is that some of us have always looked at one aspect of the Sabbath and ignored the other aspect. Now, the Bible has told us it is a sign between us and God. Now, if it is a sign, it has these two aspects. It has an outward observance and an inward observance, if I'm to say so. Now, the outward is what is highly emphasized, unfortunately, in many circles. And this is the outward that is normally emphasized, ignoring or at times ignoring the inward work pertaining to the true Sabbath keeping. The outward is in Exodus 20, and I'm going to read verse 9 and 10. It says, 6 days shalt thou labor and do all thy work, but the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord thy God. In it thou shalt not do any work, thou, nor thy son, nor thy daughter, thy manservant, thy maidservant, nor thy cattle, nor thy stranger that is within thy gates. So that is an observance which is outward. In other words, when the Sabbath comes, I cease from my daily labor. I cease from my work. And I rest, so to say. Now that is an outward that I do. And the other part that we normally add is a convocation. In Leviticus 23, we are told that it is a convocation. There will be a holy convocation. In other words, a gathering of God's people in observance of that Sabbath. Now that is something that we've emphasized. Cease from labor, congregate with the brethren. Now that is important and good. But if it is a sign, I've told you, it has two aspects to it. In other words, an outward observance that we do in cessation from labor and having a holy convocation, but then it doesn't stop there. It is also a sign, Ezekiel 20:12 has said, that it is God that sanctifies us. In other words, the Sabbath is a sign of sanctification. And who sanctifies us? God, through His Spirit. We read that in the New Testament, that we are sanctified by the Spirit. In other words, the Spirit sanctifies us, sets us apart, brings in us that holiness which comes from God. So the Sabbath is a sign of sanctification. So being a sign, we are seeing that it has an outward observance and an inward work of the Spirit. Now, if you are to get examples of signs in the Bible, you'll get an example of circumcision. It was a sign of something. So the removal of the flesh was an outward sign, an outward work. But then that one had a deeper spiritual meaning of righteousness. We read that in Romans 4:11. It was a sign of righteousness. So meaning that this sign has an outward work and an inward spiritual work. But don't forget that when it comes to, let's say, circumcision, the inward spiritual work was to be the most essential and important. However much the outward was a must, but then the inward was the essence. The spiritual was the essence. And when that spiritual was not part of someone's life, the outward work didn't make any meaning. Take another example of baptism. It is a sign of burial and resurrection unto newness of life. But then it has an outward work of immersion. Important as it is and being a must as it is, the essence is the spiritual meaning, the spiritual work. Burial, burying the old self, and a rising or a resurrection to newness of life. So these signs have an outward and an inward spiritual work. So the Sabbath has the two aspects as well. As we emphasize the outward, cease from labor, and have a holy convocation, we shouldn't forget that the essence is holiness unto God. The essence is sanctification, which is the work of the Spirit. That is why the Sabbath and the work of the Spirit are together. If we are to have true Sabbath keeping, then the Spirit must have His work of sanctification upon our lives on a daily basis. The essence is the spiritual meaning, and the outward is also a must. They move hand in hand. They move together, and none is to be diminished. None is to be ignored. In the book Desire of Ages, talking of the Sabbath, Sister White says that when the Jews separated themselves from God and rejected His righteousness, the Sabbath ceased to make meaning. The two aspects of the Sabbath, the inward work of the Spirit and an outward work of ceasing from labor, go hand in hand. If we are to keep the Sabbath holy, we must have a daily experience of the work of the Spirit upon our lives. Happy Sabbath.